an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Stone Sky, chapters 7 and 8, and Silvanagist 3. You're planning ahead, and Nassun underground. In these chapters, Nassun has begun to ask the right questions, and she finds out exactly what Nassun has been up to. And in one of the more shocking twists, although I'm not entirely sure that the writer intended it to be a twist, she decides not to go after her daughter anymore. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. First of all, thank you very much to Denise for commissioning yet another voyeur-length episode, which means that this is going to be an hour and a half again. And I am just, as much as I know that this is like a necessary thing, I am always surprised when I do manage to fill up an hour and a half with no effort whatsoever. So yeah, thank you very much, Denise, because apparently I really need it. These chapters are pretty intense, and I'm going to talk about Silvanagist first because we get a closer look at the way this city functioned. It still kind of functions, though, as we see later. And it is very different than anything I ever expected. And I have some, I don't even want to say theories because theories implies a really strong sort of, I believe this happened because this. I do not have theories. I have some vague notions, I suppose are the best way to say it. And the thing that I find the most curious is the development of everyone's understanding of magic. So let's talk about Silvanagist 3. It begins with, at first, our field excursion is simply the act of walking through the city. Now, I should mention that last week when I was talking about the whole, the reasoning behind going out into the city, I was saying, this is allegedly to give them more, quote, context, but that I thought there was something else going on that Kalenli was working towards. But as much as I said, I think there's something else going on, I never actually stopped to think about what it is. And I am kind of realizing now it's probably the death of the entire city, right? Kalenli is getting them the fuck out of there before somebody drives a fucking obelisk into the ground and causes a lava explosion. Does that sound right? Because there was a real sort of, I don't want to say urgency, but there was a focus on trying to get everybody on the tour at the same time. And the way that she and the others were working together feels like they had an inclination from her attitude that all of them should go. That this shouldn't be something where, a half and half group, that would not work for whatever it is that she is actually doing. So my guess, I have a combination sort of theory here. And this one I will call an actual theory. Oh, Tony's here. Hi, Tony. This is a gambit to get everybody out of the city at the same time. Everybody of orogenic descent. And also maybe they will be using all of them to direct the obelisk towards where it needs to go. That's my theory, that this group is going to be responsible for the destruction of the city. We will see. then we get this like really interesting reaction of all of them as they are walking out and how different the whole atmosphere is and how incredibly overwhelming it is. And this is something that I think is really difficult for those of us to understand who have not experienced some kind of like isolation and distance from the outside world. The shock of somehow going into a very busy area that when you have not experienced this before. This is something that like I went to a retreat for a couple of months and I went out into the city and it was not a very busy city, but it was still a bit like, oh my God, right. God, it's loud. Like, and it was a short time. It was like I said, a couple months. I frequently wonder with Owen having come from, out here in the burbs, we go to Dallas and stuff, but Dallas isn't really like, I wonder if we went to New York, what his reaction would be. Because the city of New York with a bunch of people living right on top of each other and 1,000 things going on at the same time is a really difficult thing to understand. It's a difficult thing to imagine if you haven't been there before. So, it's, this all makes a lot of sense, but it's not, I don't think I realized just how incredibly sheltered these origins are. There's a combination of overstimulation of sound, voices, and machine sounds and all of this. The smells, the air is different. It's not filtered the way that they're used to. So they start sneezing and they have never experienced sneezes before. So they start to panic when that begins to happen. And I duck and yelp in fear of the birds that sit in a nearby bush. And I am the calmest of us. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I realized that they just straight up were like shielded from everything in a bubble. I thought that there was a similar thing going on here as the fulcrum, where you are kept an eye on and everything, but you are given like a little park that you can walk through, that sort of thing. So they are just straight up, basically kept in storage. What settles us at last is finally having the chance to gaze upon the full beauty of the amethyst plutonic fragment. It is an awesome thing, pulsing with the slow flux of magic as it towers over the city node's heart. Every node of Sil'anagist has adapted in unique ways to suit its local climate. We have heard of nodes in the desert where buildings are grown from hardened giant succulents, nodes on the ocean built by coral organisms engineered to grow and die on command. Life is sacred in Sil'anagist, but sometimes death is necessary. Our node, the node of the amethyst, was once an old-growth forest, so I cannot help thinking that something of ancient trees' majesty is in the great crystal. Surely this makes it more stately and strong than other fragments of the machine. This feeling is completely irrational, but I look at my fellow tuners' faces as we gaze at the amethyst fragment, and I see the same love there. We have been told stories of how the world was different long ago. Once, cities were not just dead themselves, stone and metal jungles that did not grow or change, but they were actually deadly, poisoning soil, making water undrinkable, and even changing the weather by their very existence. Sil'anagist is better, but we feel nothing when we think of the city node itself. It is nothing to us, buildings full of people we cannot truly understand, going about business that should matter but does not. The fragments, though, we hear their voices. We sing their magic song. The amethyst is part of us, and we it. I don't even know where to begin on guessing what the fuck the deal is with the obelisks. Like, all right. So here goes my, probably my ugliest idea. My most disturbing idea. What if the obelisks used to be people? What if the obelisks aren't just stone. They are stone made from stone eaters. Like, because there's this whole thing that Shafa says later about still needing the Origins as tools, but attempting to strip their humanity away until they are as much just a tool as possible. And I'm wondering if the obelisks in some way are a real manifestation of that. We are trying to turn, it's sort of like the node maintainers, which we saw in the first book. And they're, people with intense power, but who are unpredictable and are used in a way that keeps their humanity completely separated. And I wonder if it's not like a crude version of what the obelisks are. Now, don't ask me any questions whatsoever about how that works. I have no idea. I don't know if there's a way to transform a person into something like this, or if you can pull the magic out of a person and instill it into an obelisk. And so, like, their abilities or consciousness or something, as well as magic, are in the obelisk. There is like an element to the origin-y that is sort of instinctive, that there are many stories of Origin simply reacting to an earthquake that begins, and there's not conscious thought. I mean, we're told that this is something, quelling small shakes is something that literal babies can do. So if that's true, if it's something that can be done so instinctively that you don't even have to be able to talk or speak or understand things to do it, it's not out of the question to me that these obelisks may be something like that. And it would make sense why one of the Stone Eaters was like stuck inside one somehow. And I like I said, this is really vague ideas that I've got. It's not, I don't have a concrete, idea beyond that, but it would make sense if there was something like that to be like the perfection of the overall idea of what these origins like would be, like the usefulness of these origins in the eyes of all of the people who do not want origins to exist. Take the origin, the person, out of the equation, put their abilities into these things that float above cities and automatically sort of look out for, earthquakes and stuff, but also are a power source. That's the assertion that we're getting in this opening description of what all of the cities were like. The nodes are run by these fragments. And they say fragments, and they say of like the machine. So that feels like it's something all based off of one project that human beings somehow created. So Kalenli leads them forward through the city as they have finally calmed down. And there's this moment where he talks about how confidently she walks, and he's noticing people staring at everybody following her, but he doesn't even think that it's because they look weird. He says that he thinks people are staring because we look like fucking idiots, because we are following behind her, like scurrying and scuttling and just clumsy and embarrassing. And he straightens his shoulders and begins to walk a little bit more in imitation of Kalenli. And Remwa sort of sends through the earth a message of just like, what are you doing? Are you trying to get them to approve of you? Because no matter how you fucking walk, it's not going to matter. And Hoa replies, this is not about them. And I liked that, because that is a very tricky thing to figure out when whether you're doing something because you want to be seen a certain way and whether you're doing something because it is important to you. As I get older, I realize how many things I thought I was doing because they were important to me. And I have begun to really quickly realize that's not why I was doing them at all. They weren't important to me. I thought they were important to other people, and I wanted them to see me as somebody who did those things. But once you really ask yourself, what do I want? And you kind of sit there and stare because you don't even know how to answer the question, it becomes painfully obvious that you were basing a lot of your behavior on outside perception of you. And it takes time to get to the bottom of that and figure out what you want. So I like this moment, and everybody sort of begins to imitate Hoa as well. And they all start to walk with a little bit more confidence. They pass by a sewage treatment facility. And it sounds very similar to ours in theory, except because the city is made of living matter, the sewage actually feeds the city, and that helps keep the city cool. It helps filter the air. It helps power everything. Like, it's honestly a genius system. And I just can't imagine what the city would look like if you saw it in a film. This would require a kind of design that is outside of anything I feel like I have ever seen. The closest I can come to when I try and imagine it is what I thought of when I was little, when I thought about little fairy villages in the woods and the way that there would be like a door built into the base of a tree between the tree roots. And like, you know, you'd have like everything that was ordinary in the woods that you would see would have an extra sort of like facet to it that made it a home or a piece of furniture or something like that. I just watched Aquaman, the DC film last night, purely out of curiosity. Owen and I were talking about it when we were recording Avatar, and I just was like, you know what, why haven't we watched that? And he had seen it already. So he was like, oh, all right, fine. And I couldn't get over how unimaginative the underwater kingdom was. It was basically just like space ships and space age design, but like underwater. And I was really hoping for something a little bit more organic that felt like it was different because they were under the water. And this is sort of getting there for me. This is scratching that itch where she is it's not just that they live in concert with nature or that they are trying to have a certain structure that is self-sustaining, but that every other area where nodes are is very different depending on what the climate is and what the plant life is. I'm super interested. I just really want to see this. So they turn the corner and they come to a building and everybody just stops dead because this is totally different than everything else. All of the buildings around them are alive, pulsing with life, adaptive. They are responding to you as you walk up to them, and there's like a symbiosis happening. It's an organism. This building is much more familiar to all of us. It is dead clay, red clay pressed into bricks with marble pillars, and there's ivy growing over it, but that is the only thing that's alive about the building. It says, we can assess no hydrostatic pressure supporting its walls. It must use force and chemical fastenings to stay upright. The windows are just glass and metal, and I can see no nematocysts growing over their surfaces. How do they keep safe anything inside? The doors are dead wood, polished dark red-brown, and carved with ivy motifs. Pretty, surprisingly. The steps are a dull, tawny white sand suspension. Centuries before, people called this concrete. Sand suspension. What an odd way to describe it. The whole thing is stunningly obsolete, yet intact and functional, and thus fascinating for its uniqueness. So this is like so weird to all of them that there's a moment where Remwa just is like, wait, we're going in there. Are you sure it's safe to go in there? Which is so amusing because, you know, this building sounds like it's in perfect repair. This is a place that all of us go and live and work every day. But to them, it's just a fucking death trap. Which, you know what? That sounds true. That makes sense to me. So they go inside and they notice a lot of the people in the building with them are just gazing around and touching things just like, what is this? Like, it doesn't seem like the people in the building are used to it. It's not like these people seem to come here every day or work here or live here and feel like this is normal to them by now. Everybody seems just as mystified. So it says a hollow sign writes itself in the air before us as we cross the threshold. We have not been taught to read, and the letters of this sign look strange in any case. But then a booming voice sounds over the building's audio system. Welcome to the story of enervation. I had no idea what this means. First of all, they haven't been taught to read. I cannot adequately get across how disturbing that is to me. It's so clearly like there's such an agenda to not teaching them something like that. And it's really upsetting. We know they're slaves. We're aware they're slaves. But we can separate ourselves from that knowledge a little bit because they are not apparently mistreated. They're mistreated for sure because some of them disappear. But as far as cruelty in action in front of their eyes, that doesn't seem to really happen. But them being kept from learning to read, that adds just a different dimension to everything in a way that I think is brilliantly done and done so offhand. So let's see. Oh, Remwa says, what is that? And they all sort of feel this like draw, this prickling. And they head towards this center sort of display, I guess is the best way to describe it. On the way, Kalenli leads us onto a wide balcony with an old-fashioned ornate wood railing. This is especially horrifying. We had to rely on a rail made from a dead tree, unconnected to the city alarm grid or anything for safety? Why not just grow a vine that would catch us if we fell? Ancient times were horrible. I love it so much. Oh, I love it so much. Like, it's such... What I love about this is that you can come up with a kind of parallel for those of us now, if we were dropped into, 500 years in the past. And it's not just there's no cell phones. It's not just there's no cars. There's no electricity. There's no plumbing. It is such basic stuff that the lack of it is such a deep shock that you're just like, what, how do you live? What are you, why would you, oh my God, no, I can't. And yet, as much as that is an understandable reaction and I can contextualize it there, what they are experiencing, that particular kind of sort of revulsion in response to the past is still so alien to me because what they have is not something that we have. This is I have seen this trope many times from people who come to the future, but it's always something like that is sort of understandable, that it's clearly in the context of what somebody like us imagines we would be horrified by in the past. For example, the fact that you actually need to cut somebody open to perform surgery, right? When the idea is that eventually we won't need to do that. We'll be able to use lasers for everything. And that makes sense. But this is something that is just totally alien. And because of it, being alien, and yet there is something vaguely flickeringly familiar. You get it. But it makes this impression on you that this is just such a wholly different way of living, that we just have no idea about the majority of how things work here in this world. So they're walking along and they finally come to this thing, and Hoa says that he thinks at first that it's just another plutonic engine. A whole one, not just a fragment of a larger piece. Yes, there is the tall, imposing central crystal. There is the socket from which it grows. This engine has even been activated. Much of its structure hovers, humming just a little, a few feet above the floor. But this is the only part of the engine that makes sense to me. All around the crystal float longer, inward curving structures. The whole of the design is somehow floral, a stylized chrysanthemum. The central crystal glows a pale gold, and the supporting crystals fade from green bases to white at the tips. Lovely, if altogether strange. Yet when I look at this engine with more than my eyes and touch it with nerves attuned to the perturbations of the earth, I gasp. Evil death, the lattice of magics created by the structure is magnificent. Dozens of silvery thread-like lines supporting one another, energies across spectra and forms, all interlinked and state-changing in what seems to be a chaotic yet utterly controlled order. The central crystal flickers now and again, phasing through potentialities as I watch, and it's so small. I have never seen an engine so well constructed. Not even the plutonic engine is as powerful or precise for its size. If it had been built as efficiently as this tiny engine, the conductors would never have needed to create us. I want to hearken back to create us. I really just feel like I'm missing some big piece. Because the create us feels like I am saying, or I was saying last episode, that Kalenli is the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Assimilated version of Stone Eaters, right? They have made her look more human in order to make them feel more comfortable, I guess. And so I assumed that the Stone Eaters are the original version. But when they say create us, now I'm like, are they the original version? Have they been told they're created when they're not actually created? When they are like the originals, really the originals? And they, like, what story have they been told, in other words? I have so many questions about this. And then he continues on, the structure makes no sense. There isn't enough magic being fed into the mini engine to produce all the energy I detect here. And I shake my head, but now I can hear what Remwa heard. A soft, insistent ringing. Multiple tones, blending and haunting and making the little hairs on the back of my neck rise. I look at Remwa, who nods, his expression tight. The engine's magics have no purpose that I can see other than to look and sound beautiful. And somehow I shiver, understanding instinctively but resisting because this contradicts everything I have learned from the laws of both physics and arcanity. Somehow this structure is generating more energy than it consumes. This should not exist, I say. But it does exist, Kalenli says. Think, she says, without words. She watches me in particular. So he realizes she's wanting him to, like, come to a conclusion and understand. It has the same fundamental structure as other plutonic engines, only its purpose is different. No, that's too simple an assessment. What's different here is philosophical, attitudinal. The plutonic engine is a tool. This thing is art. And then I understand. No one of Silana just built this. Who? You, she replies to my utter confusion. Yeah, same. Utter confusion. What? I don't. This thing is creating more energy than it consumes. And this is a revelation because the Stone Eaters are told that the plutonic engines created to sustain these cities need them to function. But here we see an engine that requires nothing to function because it powers itself. So, following that line of thinking, it is possible for this to exist without them needing to power it using their own magic and abilities. But they did need to create it. So it's not like when Hoa says, if this is possible, there's no need for them to create us. That's not necessarily true. And this is, I suspect, what they're talking about when they are trying to tell the Stone Eaters that they aren't reaching their full potential yet, but that she is on the way, Kalenli, that maybe she is a step closer to creating this sort of self-sustaining power source, and they could reach that potential as well, but they just aren't for whatever reason. Is that it? And does that require a complete sacrifice of the being to be sustainable? Like, was this little perfect engine made by sacrificing one of their friends that's gone, that they just noticed missing? It's kept in this building that's old enough that I don't think so. This feels like it's from... This perfect engine was created a long time back. And maybe they're still trying to recreate it because however it was created initially has been lost. There's technology like that like we rediscover some shit that we think we're so smart for. And then it turns out that, you know, the Persians had been doing that like 200,000 years ago or some crazy, you know, like I just don't, I have so many like barely there thoughts, but okay, time to move on. Chapter 7, you're planning ahead. So we go to Nassun and she is still with the comm. And she is surprised at the fact that Ika is willing to take in Maxix and all of his people. Nassun thinks that Ika is like, you know, gonna dig her heels in because they're all Origines and many of them are sick. But she is very practical about it and is just like, they're bringing in a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge of the area, a lot of supplies, and I will make use of their knowledge and their abilities for as long as I can. And if they die, they die. All of us are going to die, but I'll do what I can while I can. So at this point, Nassun is beginning to get a little bit more restless. She had been sticking with the comm despite knowing that she has to go after Nassun because of her injury and her recovery time. But now she's beginning to feel better and she really starts to get the itch to go after her daughter again. So Hoa has confirmed that Nassun is on the move and has been traveling away from the site of the sapphire since you opened the obelisk gate. It was too late to find her before you ever woke up. But there is hope. In the small hours of one morning after Hoa has taken the stone burden of your left breast from you, he says quietly, I think I know where she's going. If I'm right, she'll stop soon. He sounds uncertain. No, not uncertain. Troubled. So we get a description of how Hoa takes the stone breast off of her and that it just like comes right off. And there's this moment where she says, you're perversely proud to feed someone else with it because that was the breast that Nassun liked best when she was nursing. And I thought that was kind of strange, but felt true, you know? So finally, Nassun pushes a little bit, presses Hoa for a real answer. And it's just like, you're sensing something. What's going on? And he says, I believe Nassun seeks to open the obelisk gate herself. And immediately Nassun is like, holy fucking what? And there's a moment of her being like, yeah, no way. And then immediately it is followed up by, oh, I felt her power. And absolutely, she could fucking do that. But it will kill her. And when she says something to Hoa about tracking her, and he confirms that he can do it, she realizes that means that any Stone Eater will be able to do it now, that her connection to the obelisk that has been established is putting her in danger. And she's like, oh, fuck, so one of you is after her. And he says the one you call the Gray Man, which is the one that Nassun calls Steel now. And she starts to get, understandably, extremely agitated and starts sort of lashing out at Hoa for what he is, essentially. And he kind of is like confirming that, yeah, she's being manipulated and they're trying to use you. They're trying to use her. There are, of course, some of my kind that are like that. And she does that. All of you are like that kind of thing that you do when you are really upset. And it feels so true in the moment. You know, for us women, for example, just being like, oh my God, men are such garbage. And like, no, we know that there are good men out there. But when we say it, we mean it. Like what we're saying, we are not trying to hear a qualifier right now. There's no hashtag not all Stone Eaters happening. I don't want to hear it, you know. And he tells her that he hasn't lied to her. And she says, no, you've just withheld the truth so much that it's the same fucking thing. And he finally is like about to say something else to her as she walks away. And she sort of pushes him away from her and is like, I need to go rest. I want to sit down. I want to like think things over and figure out what to do. And he's like, no, seriously, there's one more thing that you need to know. Jija is dead. And then we move to Hoa's perspective. And he says, I remind myself why I continue to tell this story through your eyes than my own. Because outwardly, you're too good at hiding yourself. Your face has gone blank, your gaze hooded. But I know you. I know you. Here is what's inside you. So, immediate response inside of Nassun is, oh, she's just dead. Now Nassun is safe. And right after thinking that, she's like, wait, but is she? And she asks, how did he die? And he tells her Nassun did it. And she did it on purpose, and it was not origin-y. So I find that really interesting because I have been interpreting what happens when somebody is turned into these precious stones as origin-y gone bad, but not exactly, because it feels like it's going right. It feels like it's origin-y functioning in its proper way, and the origin-y that they have all been taught is actually the bad way. But now he's saying it wasn't origin-y, and that means it's entirely something else, which is that just magic? Is that what we're going to call it? Because they're using the word magic now. It's being used in the previous Sil'anagis session. It's mentioned a couple of times. So we're on a different bit now. And origin-y, it sounds like, it's sort of like, oh my God, that's so last year, you know? So at this point, she gets really urgent about wanting to go to where Jija's body is. And at first, I was a little bit surprised at this impulse. I kind of was like, would I want to see the body of the dude or talk to the people that were around when the guy who killed my son died? Like, but once I stopped to think about it, I was like, okay, this makes sense actually, because she's going to want to get a sense of what their environment was like, because she wants to try and rationalize what happened a little bit if she can. She wants to get a sense of like what pressure Nassun might have been under that would cause her to do something like that. She wants to make it be okay. And she tells Hoa to take her, and he tells her to close her eyes, and she doesn't listen. And he pulls her through the earth, through the center of it, and pulls her out again on the side right near, what is it called? Fallen moon? Lost moon? And she is really fucking shook because her eyes were open and she literally saw the fires at the center of the earth. She thought that it would kill her to go through like that, and it didn't. She's just like freaked out. She's not even like, there wasn't even a sense of pressure or anything like that. She is just pure freaked out. And she's standing there realizing like, oh my God, this spot that I'm standing, the rifting is just not affecting it. Like, clearly the season is finally beginning and there's ash falling, but I can still see the sky a little bit. I can see the sun. There's plants that all haven't died. This is as if she went back in time a year, you know? So she's walking towards this community and she sees the crucible. And she's a little startled because it is not what she expected. She thought that this was going to be the Antarctic fulcrum. And she had always heard that the Antarctic fulcrum was particularly beautiful and just kind of a state-of-the-art, you know, facility. And this place, as she puts it, this is nothing. It's a camp. It is, you know, it's a very sort of informal version. And she is a little bit mystified by this. And as they're investigating it, this dude wanders up and he mistakes her for a guardian, which I found interesting because Shafa has such a distinct look that I kind of interpreted that all guardians had the same look that Shafa has, but it appears not. It seems that, you know, you can look like a regular person, but it's more the vibe you give off that makes you seem like a guardian. And the fact that you smile constantly all the time. So that is what she does, is she takes on that sort of aspect in order to intimidate this guy into telling her what's going on. It's a combo of intimidate and also trust, because as much as he does not trust, or I feel like he trusts that guardians are going to have regular people's best interest, Still's best interests at heart. So he trusts that, but just as an individual, it's clear he doesn't really like her, and it's probable that he didn't like any of the other guardians either. So he tells her about this community, and all of the kids like went away for some sort of training thing, but he says it in this way that implies he doesn't really buy that's what was going on. And he says something about how Shafa took them, and I had completely forgotten what a shock it was going to be to her to hear that name again and find out that he was still alive. Like, she is just not ready, and it takes a real second for her to collect herself and not lose it completely when she hears the name. And when he tells her that Shafa is with her little girl, her instinct is to be like, I have to find her, I have to protect her, he's going to hurt her. But then he continues on talking about the fact that Nassun, that she is the one who made him the most afraid, and that he hopes Shafa kills her while they're on that trip. And she's kind of like, oh, really? Well, what's that about? And he says, oh, yeah, well, I guess you wouldn't know, would you? And he leads her over to a pile of rocks that used to be Jija. And she realizes what the fuck this is. It takes a second. And all of a sudden she's like, oh my God. And she has to keep everything as carefully controlled as possible because she can't let on that she's not a guardian. And he explains hearing the like sounds of a crack of thunder, how Shafa suddenly like told them that he's taking all of the kids away, and how that they like went to see what was up with the building and everything after they all left, and they found the bodies of the other two guardians. And then she's realizing, because he says, Shafa, she says to him, Shafa won't be coming back. And again is sort of thinking, there's something going on with Shafa and her. I am not understanding this. What the fuck is going on? So she asks him to tell her about Jija. She wants to see Jija through their eyes and figure out what could be going on. He explains the tension of the relationship. There's this awful moment. The girl seemed all right when they first got here. Wouldn't know her for one of them. She was so proper and polite. Somebody raised her right. You smile again. Perfect, tight-jawed, guardian smile. Yeah. That's one of those things that's such a, like, disgusting backhanded compliment. You're so polite. I would never know that you were one of these subhuman species. And he says the girl minded her father well enough until a few weeks ago. They heard him shouting at her one night, and she moved up here to the compound with the others. You could see how the change sort of untied Jija. He started talking to himself about how she wasn't his daughter anymore, cursing out loud now and again, hitting things, walls and such when he thought you weren't looking. And he says when the girl would always be following around Shafa. Whenever he'd hold still, she'd take his hand. You don't see them being affectionate, but he seemed to think the world of her, and I heard he nearly killed Jija when the man came at her, actually. And this is when she begins to realize what the fuck is going on. That she betrayed her daughter, she broke her hand, she abandoned her, and, you know, we know that's not exactly how it went, but it feels that way, and disappeared. And her father killed her brother and then abandoned and tried to kill her. So yeah, she found somebody who protected her, actively protected her, put himself in harm's way for her sake, with no qualifications at all. He wouldn't have had to break Nassun's hand, would he? No. You did that to her yourself. And Uche was another broken hand inflicted by Jija. And now everything inside you shudders at the thought that follows, and it takes the willpower that has destroyed cities to keep this shudder internal. But how much more welcome would a guardian's conditional, predictable love have been to Nassun after her parents' unconditional love had betrayed her again and again? Ooh, yikes. There is nothing quite like seeing the evidence of your fuck up manifest in another human being. And I say this as not a parent, which is a huge part of why I'm not interested in being a parent. I do plenty of damage without having kids, thank you very much. I like to think the good I do outweighs the damage that I do, but I don't know that. I have no reason to think that. I have to hope that and try for that. And a kid just, you can do your best and you really think you're doing your best. And then your kid's 15 years old and you realize how wrong you went. That the exact thing you thought was your best is the thing that ruined them. And I don't mean ruin them so that they're now like a worthless bad person, but it is something that will be the sort of fulcrum of their lives. This will be something that they struggle with forever. This particular issue that you thought you handled really well will be a hang up for, you know, if they don't get therapy and guidance forever, it will be a problem. And to see that this little girl that she cared about is befriending the man who broke her hand and in her eyes ruined her life is making Nassun just come apart at the seams here. So Found Moon, that's right, that's the name of it. He offers to introduce Nassun to the headswoman. And she says that she needs some time to consider the situation, to please go and let the headwoman know that she will be coming down in a moment, but that she has to take a moment. And she asks him, he asks her what's going on. And it's just like, you know, something's happened, obviously, but it seems worse than usual. And she says, one person's normal is another person's shattering. Would have been nice if we could have all had normal, of course, but not enough people wanted to share. So now we all burn. She gives a little bit too real of an answer. And it's honestly the entirely true answer, because we know exactly what it is that Nassun is heading out to do. And I thought this was interesting too. She crouches next to Jija's pile of rocks and sort of assesses him. And this is interesting. Beneath the colors, you perceive the crazed every which wayness of the magic threads in him. It's wholly different from what happened to your arm and your breast. He has been smashed apart and rearranged at random on an infinitesimal level. So that's interesting. There are two different ways to achieve the exact same result. She somehow causes her body to turn into stone, but it's like an organized, correct sort of like perfection when it happens. But when it happened with Jija, it was this like sort of chaotic, manic reaction. Very interesting. And she's thinking to herself about the fact that she has made Nassun like herself. And that might be what kept her alive, but that's also what caused her to kill Jija. Jija owed you a debt of pain for your son, but you owe Nassun in turn. You didn't save her from Jija. You haven't been there when she's needed you. How dare you presume to protect her? Gray Man and Shafa. She has found her own better protectors. She found the strength to protect herself. You are so very proud of her, and you don't dare go anywhere near her ever again. Which I am just so floored by. I never thought that was going to be the thing. That Nassun was just going to be like, oh, me coming back into her life is just going to fuck it all up even more. I got to stay out. Interesting. I'm not totally sure I agree with that assessment. I feel like it would do Nassun some good to know that her mother has been looking for her. But whether or not her mother has been looking for her doesn't erase what her mother was like before the shattering happened. You know, like they did not have a good relationship to begin with. So as much as it may be reassuring to know that her mother was trying to find her, the presence of her mother doesn't necessarily point to an improvement in her life. And there's something sort of beautiful about Nassun, like understanding that and coming to terms with that, because I feel like so many parents out there do not have the self-awareness to understand the damage that they can do. They want to have a relationship with their kid. And so that desire to have a relationship isn't necessarily born out of love. It can be born out of a feeling of pride of the fact that they want to be able to say that they have a relationship. It could be born out of a feeling of guilt. But it's often not just about, I love you and want to know what's up in your life. There can be a selfish element to it. And regardless of what it would do to their kid, they have a very particular desire that they think should be reciprocated, that like their child should want their parent in their lives, and that by default, a parent's presence is better than a parent's absence. That's just not always true. And I think a lot of parents really cannot come to grips with the idea that their kid will do better without them than otherwise. Because who wants to believe that you raised somebody who you damaged so badly that the best thing you can do is to leave them alone? Nobody wants to believe that they fucked up that badly. And so there's a part of me that respects the fact that as soon as apparently coming to that conclusion, and then there's a part of me that is, you know, very like traditionally going into the, but you're her mom and you need to find her and that's what this has been all about kind of thing, which isn't, that's just me getting caught up in what should be true according to fucking, I don't know, fairy tales, you know? So yeah, she has Hoa take her over to the comm, and she stands there for a minute and she says that she doesn't know what to do because as far as she's concerned, there's nothing left now. And he's like, you have the comm that you're part of. And that doesn't really like sink into her. And then he says something about how he can't die. And she realizes that what he's saying is it is safe for her to become attached to him because he isn't going to go anywhere. Not like everybody else that she has cared about. And she heads forward towards the camp, and I'm extremely interested to hear what the head woman is going to have to say about what happened, and if she is going to put together who Nassun actually is. Just really, really wondering about that. Or wait, I'm realizing she says takes a step toward the camp. Oh, so there, she's not going to go see the head woman. She said that she would, but she got brought back down to the community heading towards Renanis. Oh, okay. Never mind. Because, yeah, I was a little surprised at first when this ended, when I thought she was going to go see the head woman. I was like, I wonder what more information she needs. But, okay, I misread this. She gets brought back to her camp. Got it. So then we get a little bit, you know, all of these chapters end with like a little peek into history. And we get to see one about a community that was turned entirely to glass. And I love that the note here, it says, question mark, is this right? Glass, not ice? Find tertiary sources. Which I find interesting that it is being said glass rather than stone, you know, like we have seen that the stone is colored, but it sounds like they are precious gems, like they are turned into sapphire and ruby, you know. So under intensive questioning by comm militia, which I am guessing means torture, he admitted to somehow doing the deed, claimed that it was the only way to stop the Jeketi volcano from erupting, though no eruption signs were observed. Reports indicate the man's hands were also stone. Questioning interrupted by a stone eater who killed 17 militia members and took Raga into earth. Both vanished. So this is just incredibly fascinating to me. Somehow what he did attracted the attention of a stone eater and it came to him and pulled him away. The connection to the obelisks draws these stone eaters and causes them to take custody, and that is a nice way of saying it, of whomever did this. I can't put it together. There are puzzle pieces missing here. I'm dying. I really want to know. Okay, so then we go to Nassun Underground. She is still going down the stairs and is really noticing how this place doesn't have the feel of an abandoned building the way that she expected. There isn't dust on anything. The air is like really fresh. It doesn't smell stale and closed up the way that you would expect. The lights are still working. The doors are still opening and closing. She is just kind of mystified about this. Here comes the thing that got to me pretty bad. Nassun can't see Shafa's face and must gauge his mood by his broad shoulders. It bothers her that she does this, watching him constantly for shifts of mood or warnings of tension. It is another thing she learned from Jija. She cannot seem to shed it with Shafa or anyone else. Okay, so... this is just the show where I cry. Just every time. That is some real shit, guys. If you grew up with somebody volatile, you become hyper aware all the time of the mood they are in and the mood they are heading towards. And when they shift into bad mood town, you take note of what it was that set them off and attempt to not do that again or let that happen again. You watch everything about their body language, the way they raise their voice, and even the tension in the room, the shifting of air, the atmosphere will change. And nary a word needs to be said, and you can still tell something is about to happen or would have happened had someone said the wrong thing, done the wrong thing. It is a really strange thing to live with, especially in my case. My father only really blew up, a couple times in my entire life. But there was always the sense that he was right on the edge of it all the time. And I tried very hard to enjoy when he was happy, but it wasn't possible to let go of the constant assessing, for lack of a better word. And you just hold that as something that you do with people forever. And I've always talked about myself as being someone who is pretty good at reading people. And I realize that a lot of that comes down to having to be. It's not a skill I was just born with. It was a skill that I acquired so that I could make it through with minimal damage. And what's so frustrating is that even when you are careful, and you think you have it figured out, it can still erupt with no notice. And one of the worst times for me, I just barely managed to lock myself in the bathroom in time. And he broke the door in half. And I just had to wait until he tired himself out and backed away. And then waited another hour before coming out because I wasn't totally sure it was over because I couldn't see him. And I didn't know what was happening. I think I was 15 for that one. And when you try and move on and just like have a normal relationship, you continue to do that. And it's really hard to explain, because if the people that you're having relationships with have not gone through this sort of thing, they will not understand your reaction to things that to them are not a big deal. So like Owen, when he gets angry, he tends to slam doors and throw things. And when he does that, it won't be directed at me ever. He's angry because of work. He's angry because the cat peed on something. He's angry because he got a flat tire. It doesn't matter that it's not directed at me. I curl up and want to vomit. It is just too late. Whether it's directed at me or not, it feels directed at me. And there's no getting around that. It's just in your blood after a certain point, you know? And the fact that Nassun is still reacting this way, and that it bothers her that she still is, I just want to like hold her and be like, sweetie, I'm so sorry, but that's just never going to go away. That's just going to be the way that you interact with the world. Like, and you can recognize it and try and like separate yourself from that deep, instinctive lizard brain sort of fear. But it isn't going to stop that pit in your stomach from immediately forming. There's no way to avoid it happening initially. You can choose how you cope with it once it's there. But, this got to me, guys. It got to me real bad. It's just one of those things that, like, you try and tell yourself that shit wasn't so bad for you because you didn't get hit, you know? That because of the ways that you've seen other friends and, you know, family be abused, that what happened to you isn't really so bad. And like, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that it had no effect. And it doesn't mean that what happened to you is unimportant and invalid. So anyway, yeah, that fucking killed me. So welcome to Natasha's crying hour. Hi. So, they're continuing down the stairs. And I keep forgetting how young Nassun still is. And she's having like trouble keeping up because she's got these short legs. They finally stop and take a break. And she is asking why the Guardians come here during a season, which I had forgotten that this was like supposed to be this whole thing. And why don't they stay in a comm? And he is like, well, comms, like, they need people who can contribute something. And I'm not really much of a contribution. I can help with, like, the defense. But I can't have children. And he says, and without origins to tend, we Guardians become difficult to live with. And this makes me think of after Shafa got out of the water and he attacked that family and killed them all, pulled the silver out of them. They weren't origins except for that one little boy. And he just laid waste to an entire household in order to power himself back up. And that is apparently what would happen, you know. So she says, what happens when a Guardian takes silver from a still? Or no, she doesn't say it. She just wonders it to herself. And she's like, that might be why they leave. So then he says, it's not exactly that I'm infertile. I don't know that I can't have children. But Guardians should not, because they carry the trait of orogeny, which is really, really interesting. Like, are we really doing this? Are they all coming from the same place? Are guardians made from stone eaters as well? There's that shard in him that is hungry, that wants silver. Is the shard a piece of the obelisks? Because the obelisks seem to connect with Origins and want their magic and feed on it. And I think that sounds like what's happening inside him. And is that why they are so strong and so fast? Because there is that bit of a shard of obelisk in them that they are powered off of? Like, are these obelisks alive somehow? It's just, I don't know. So she says finally that she doesn't understand the other guardians and how this works. And he says, I remember that I loved the Origins to whom I was guardian, or at least I believed that I loved them. I wanted them to be safe, even if that meant inflicting small cruelties to hold the greater at bay. Anything, I felt, was better than genocide. And she asks what genocide is, and he explains. And she begins to say, but that's what's been happening. And he sort of nods and says, we prevent Originy from disappearing because in truth, the people of the world would not survive without it. Origins are essential. And yet, because you are essential, you cannot be permitted to have a choice in the matter. You must be tools, and tools cannot be people. Guardians keep the tool, and to the degree possible, while still retaining the tool's usefulness, kill the person. And when she hears this and is just like, oh, right, this is why I need to destroy the entire world. Which, fucking fair, kid. You know what? You're not wrong. I'm not mad at you for this. That conclusion feels justified. And she thinks about how people think that Origins are so scary and so powerful. And she's like, I mean, that is true, but also I can just starve to death. I can just be strangled. I can die like anybody else. And then she says, but breathing doesn't always mean living, and maybe genocide doesn't always leave bodies. And I was like, whoa, brother, that is a fucking word right there. Maybe genocide doesn't always leave bodies. Fuck. Because that's part of what Shafa says when he explains what genocide is. Killing a people down to the very idea of them as a people. And I mean, that is essentially what has happened with so many Native communities. It is really like, that is exactly it. The idea of them as a cohesive community and a people. Oof. Yikes. So, they continue heading in the next morning. They take this break here, and then they go down. And they walk. It takes a long time. They get into this enormous cavern. And it takes a little while to figure out exactly what happened here. But they realize that the city was built before this place was enclosed. It used to be open, and it was built inside of like a crater. And then there was another eruption in the middle of the city that caused a like lava sort of canopy, is what it keeps being called. A lava canopy to form that essentially had to be formed and controlled by some of the most powerful Origins, like probably more than one, in order to be structurally stable. And she can see that in the ceiling of this lava that she thought was just like stalagmites or stalactites hanging down, she realizes that that pattern is actually the imprint of where buildings had been pressed up into the ceiling of lava. And the reason that she doesn't really understand how this worked is because she, unlike we the readers, doesn't know that the buildings were organic material. So she's looking around trying to see like rubble, ruins, something to indicate where the building stood and that there was material they were built from, and it's not there. And she's just really like confused by it. The sand that they're standing on is like pale, and there's bits of dark brown and gray here and there, but mostly, and there's like some metal and whatnot, but there's just really not enough here. And then she begins to realize that what she is standing on are like the ashes. It's everything burned. And far beneath the sand surface, she finds pressed pathways in long straight lines. S-curves, bowl-shaped dips, oblong rounds, hourglass loops, not a single square. She puzzles over the odd composition of these foundations and then abruptly realizes that it all has the cess of something mineralized, alkaline. Oh, it's petrifying, which means originally. So, yeah, she's starting to put things together. And she realizes that when the lava closed in over the city, it killed everything inside. This was not done because, like, when I first was reading this, I was thinking that this, like, canopy was created to protect them from an eruption, and that it somehow, like, it backfired or failed, but, like, it had been done to keep them safe. No. It feels like this place was pressure cooked on purpose. They created this canopy in order to kill everybody inside of this huge roasting hot bubble. So they're noticing also that even though this place is, very far down, caves are still teeming with life usually. And this cavern should have been taken over again by fungi and bats and insects and things. And there is nothing here alive. So she's sort of like assessing this and tracing it. And she feels something pulling ahead. And she says something bad is here. Something is eating this place. That's why nothing grows. Something is taking all the magic away. Without that, everything's dead. And Shafa tells her that they don't have to keep going if she doesn't want to. But she really wants to know what the fuck is going on. And she's also prideful. It is understandable. I mean, I'd be bummed if she decided to turn around. I want to know what the fuck is going on. So they're heading forward, and all of a sudden, there's this weird moment. She comes across Steele, first of all. And Steele is really... There is an edge to everything that he has said and done up till now. But that edge kind of is sharper this time than it normally is. He is hiding less because they're so close now. I think that he feels like he has won. He tells her that the transport vehicle that they need to use, that the system has to be rebooted and powered up. And he does not explain to her that powering it up will likely kill her. He winds up just sort of like standing back and seeing if she manages to figure it out. And Shafa spoiler alert, does not appreciate that approach at all. So they go down, and there is this sense of weariness to everything. That's the word that Nassun thinks of as she's seeing how like faint the light is, that there's just sort of like, there's something tired about it. So there's this blue light, and she follows this because that seems to be the direction she needs to go. And they come across this room, this cavern that has as it's called, titanic column of solid blue-black volcanic glass. And they stare at it and realize that this is the source of the lava that is covering the ceiling and the sky. This is where it came from. It shot out of the center of the city here and poured upward out of here. And this is when she ties into the obelisks, or an obelisk. She can guess and guess what happened as clearly as if she were there. Long ago, an obelisk sat here at the bottom of this cavern, one of its points jammed into the ground like some kind of bizarre plant. At some point, the obelisk lifted free of the pit to float and shimmer like its fellows above the strange immensity of the city. And then something went wrong. Very wrong. The obelisk fell. Where it struck the earth, Nassun imagines she can hear the echo of the concussion. It did not merely fall, it drove its way in, punching through and churning down and down and down, powered by all the force of concentrated silver within its core. Nassun can't track its path for more than a mile or so down, but there's no reason to think it didn't just keep going. To where, she cannot guess. And in its wake, channeled straight up from the most molten part of the earth, came a literal fountain of earth fire to bury the city. There's still nothing around that looks like a way to supply power to the station. Nassun notices, though, that the cavern's illumination comes from enormous pylons of blue light near the base of the glass column. These make up the lower and innermost tier of the chamber. Something is making that light. So she has a moment here where she considers not going on, and Shafa clearly does not trust Steele. And he's not going to tell her what to do, but he's sort of like, are you positive that you want to follow Steele's instructions? Like, really? And she feels something pulling her up ahead and mentions the track and says the sapphire knows this place. And she sort of reaches out to it again, asking a question, and gets consumed by this overall impression. She stands at the center of 3 tiers, no longer in a cavern, but facing a blue horizon across which pleasant clouds churn and race and vanish and are reborn. The tiers around her teem with activity, though it all blurs together, and what she can discern of the few instants of stillness make no sense. Strange vehicles like the car she saw in the tunnel run along the sides of buildings, following tracks of different colored light. The buildings are covered in green, vines and grassy rooftops and flowers curling over lintels and walls. People, hundreds of them, go in and out of these, walk up and down the paths in unbroken blurs of motion. She cannot see their faces, but she catches glimpses of black hair like Shafa's, earrings of artfully curled vine motifs, a dress swirling about ankles, fingers flicking while adorned with sheaths of colored lacquer. And everywhere is the silver that lies beneath heat and motion, the stuff of the obelisks. It spiders and flows, converging not just into trickles but rivers, and when she looks down she sees that she stands in a pool of liquid silver soaking in through her feet. And she manages to kind of come back to herself. And Shafa is watching her, and he says something really interesting. Don't trust the obelisks, little one. We allowed a few to progress back in the fulcrum. I was permitted to remember that much because it's important. The few who reached 9th or 10th ring status, they were always able to sense the obelisks, and the obelisks could sense them in turn. they would have drawn you to them one way or another. They're missing something, incomplete somehow, and that's what they need an origin to provide. But the obelisks killed them, my Nassun. The obelisks will change you, remake you if they can. That's what that rusting stone eater wants. So, the obelisks change you. But what made the obelisks? Are the obelisks naturally occurring? Is the change that they want to make actually a bad change? He says they kill you, but do they? Does he know that? Does Shafa have enough information to be able to make that claim and for me to believe him? I don't know. So finally, they come into the main room, and there are these weird vines growing here that seem to be more alive than everything else. And she senses that she is the thing that is meant to power them up by touching them. And I kept thinking of like a power cable, something like that. It sounds more like it is organic in nature, so it's not like the way that we think of a power cable, but it seems to function the same way. And she can tell that this thing does not have any silver in it. It has negative spaces where silver should be, but isn't. And she knows what to do. And it says it does not hurt. That's the trap of it. The sensation that spreads through her body is pleasant, in fact, relaxing. If she could not perceive the silver, or the way the vine instantly starts dragging every bit of silver out of the spaces between her cells, she would think it was doing something good for her. As it is, it will kill her in moments. She has access to more silver than just her own, though. Lazily, through the languor, Nassun reaches for the sapphire, and the sapphire responds instantly, easily. Amplifiers, Alabaster called them, long before Nassun was ever born. Batteries is how you think of them, and how you once explained them to Ika. What Nassun understands the obelisks to be is simply engines. So, she is the connection, and it fills this with power, and it is a really close thing, but Shafa manages to pull her away from the vine just before it looks like maybe she's going to die. And it worked. This weird cilia-covered organic sort of train car appears and is functioning. But Shafa is really, really mad. And because he feels like Steel tricked her, which Steel kind of did. And Steel tells Shafa when Shafa's like, what the fuck, dude? He says, death is what usually happens when someone charges a system. Origins capable of channeling magic can survive it, as can Guardians, who usually can draw upon an outside source. Shafa stiffens. Nassun is confused by his fury at first, and then she realizes ordinary Guardians, the uncontaminated kind, draw silver from the earth and put it into the vines. Guardians like Umber and Nita can probably do the same, though they would try only if it served Father Earth's interests. But Shafa, despite his core stone, cannot rely on the earth's silver and cannot draw more of it at will. If Nassun was in danger from the vine, that was because of Shafa's inadequacy, or so Steel seems to suggest. So Nassun has to kind of pull Shafa back into himself, because this sort of accusation really fucks him up. He is extremely hurt by it and sort of starts to lose control a little bit. And she grabs the front of his shirt and is yanking on it in order to get his attention, and tries to say that everything is her fault. The fact that he is here with her and has lost everything. She's like trying to take blame for it, and he is not hearing it. He is immediately like, girl, no, that's not how this works. And she can sense that core stone trying to get him to betray himself. And she tells him that they are family, and he has to let her protect him sometimes. And that really seems to like touch him, you know? And she looks over at Steele and tells Steele, don't do that again. And Steele doesn't reply, but he does say that Shafa shouldn't come with them. It's a mistake to bring him with us. And she says she doesn't care. So they get into this thing that sort of opens again in this weird sort of like organic way. It's covered in like weird feathers. And there are all of these chairs inside. They will ride in style to the other side of the world. As they climb aboard and the feathers weave the doors shut behind them. As they sit down, the great vehicle utters a low, resonant tone and begins to move. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh my God, I'm dying to know what happens, guys. I am really excited to continue on with this one. Yee! All right, so yeah, thank you again so much to Denise. Again, I filled up an hour and a half, no problem. Appreciate that so much. It really, really helps. And apologies again for crying, as I do, because I am a baby. I hope that you guys enjoy the episode. And I will see you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.